Hello, sorry about that.
Hey, Han.
Hello.
So today is April 25th. This is the bi-weekly SIG Instrumentation SIG meeting, and we have a couple topics on the agenda today. I think this was copied from next agenda, but I don't remember what it is. Initiatives we want to pursue. I say we punt that to the end of the meeting.
It's good.
And let's also punt on future of the usage metrics collector. Let's see, there's one from int underflow.
That's me.
We have the floor.
Okay, cool. That was quicker than I thought. Yes, so Damien will know a lot about this, but I'll go basically through where we are right now. So at KubeCon Europe, we in the contributor summit, we discussed the current state of events and where we could possibly improve this. For context here, the events obviously right now are a best effort system. There's a level of inconsistent view in that you can see some events on some nodes and not some events on other nodes. I'll assume that there's a baseline knowledge of the current behavior of events, because this is SIG instrumentation, but please shout if you think that you want some more context here before I go into this next part. But we were basically looking at how we can make this better for end users. So to give a practical example, I work at Uber, and in our case, we have to basically get the events from all of our nodes at once, and then we collate them and then deal with them. But there's basically two approaches that we thought we could do in Kubernetes. There's externalization, which is the idea is that you make it an external data stores problem by just punting all the events almost like a webhook towards someone else. And there's aggregation, aggregation being the more involved one, where you look at, for example, some sort of secondary data store that isn't etcd, which is for more ephemeral and temporary and not as critical things. We, at the time of the contributor summit, we basically just got as far as identifying that these are the two ways we could go. We didn't go any further into which way we would prefer to do, if any, and what the appetite is for introducing either of these things into the Kubernetes itself. Obviously, aggregation is a lot bigger of a thing than externalization, because or at least this is my opinion now, but aggregation is a lot bigger of a thing than externalization because of the whole secondary data store thing. That is a whole project in its own right, and it's a very big one. But I wanted to put this on the agenda basically to decide or to get a feel at least for how we feel about both of these approaches. The first one being externalization, where you push this data to an external, where you allow users, I should say, to push this best effort to an external data store directly through a webhook or something similar. And aggregation, which of course is the secondary data store and all of this. And I just wanted to get a feel for how, what is it? Say for example that Uber was to build this and to push upstream, which is there any preferences as to which way we want to go with this? And how do you actually feel about either of these approaches in either case? Does that make sense?
Yeah, so events are kind of thorny. I thought we did aggregation for events CB1. Like we dedupe and we increment a counter or something.
We do. Maybe aggregation is a bad name for this, but the idea of the aggregation path here is you have a secondary data store and you report all of the events in here. There's no rate limiter anymore.
So here's the problem with events, and it's actually kind of a fundamental problem with events. So it's best effort, and there's actually a reason why it's best effort. It's not because of the volume, actually. Events breaks the watch protocol because they use leases, etcd leases under the hood, and they expire. And what happens is when the leases expire, they batch delete all of the events associated to that etcd lease. And you can't actually do that. Hold on, let me find.
This is very interesting because I was talking to Jordan Liggett about this, and he was saying that they initially introduced a rate limiter because they were finding events were DOSing etcd many years ago. But that's an approach that I've not actually heard before, so that's quite interesting.
There is an issue.
It is still dosing the etcd. Like it still happens every now and then.
Oh yeah.
The thing, Han, is that I don't think events in the first place should be watchable or even handled as API resources.
They're not reliably
In the
watchable. That
sense-
is actually a consequence of the thing I'm
Because
describing.
the thing is, they are ephemeral resources, and we don't have really a notion of ephemeral resources in Kubernetes. And to me, they are more like actual logs that are structured, but a bit differently than structured logging. They are meant to be user-facing. It's just that the way by which we are delivering it to the users is via the Kube API server and the API. But it's not scalable, and it's not like, at the moment, the only way to see events is via kubectl, and that's not a very UI-friendly approach. So yeah, I don't really see why it's behind an API. It's still, like, if we want to go forward, I would move it away if we even could.
Okay, so just to clarify, so if this is a question mainly for you. So would you say, for example, that there's some stuff, for example, that you can only get from events, because other SIGs report that data only in events? In your opinion, is that like misuse of events because events are only for humans?
Yes, because machines should not reliably depend on events because it fundamentally breaks the watch protocol.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I'm just, for example, a lot of the node stuff is reported only via events. And so when we want to, say, for example, I want to make it easier for users to understand why the containers crashed, well, I kind of have to use these events because otherwise I can't get this data anywhere else. But maybe that's more of a SIG node problem than a SIG instrumentation problem, frankly. And maybe the best way to go here is to actually, make it very clearly and make this not an API anymore.
No,
That's it.
I
That's
think your use
interesting.
case is actually a good use case for events, like, because your end goal is to show the information to users, and that's what the actual information that is inside events is meant for. Like, for example, the container couldn't pull the image. It's permanently restarting for some reason. That's information you want to share with your user that started the container. The thing we don't have today is a good way, a good UI to show events. And essentially, like, the only way by default is just to get the data via kubectl, which is not a good UI.
I mean,
for that kind of stream of data.
My follow on here, though, is that if we're saying that this is a valid use case for events, then in my opinion, we shouldn't be opinionated about that you have to get these events from, say, a UI that's part of the Kubernetes project, because there are going to be, cases where people are going to want to get these events and collate them themselves, if that makes sense. I think, we should either say almost absolutely that, yes, these are for humans, and so we're not going to give you an API, or yes, there are valid use cases for machines to consume these, in which case we are going to give you some sort of API. Does that make sense? I think we should be very much committed to either one or the other. I don't think we should, because I'm almost worried we're going to be in this half state where we're like, oh, they're for humans only. But if you're making an API that then exposes them to humans, that's okay. And now you're in this half state where they're not for machines, but they kind of are. But they're not, but they kind of are.
Yeah, that's a very good point.
I found
Like,
it
since
true.
they are not meant for machine, there is no reason to have them as part of an API. I think it's more of a historical thing that, well, it was just created as a resource that is stored in etcd. But I think everyone would agree that events have no reason to be in etcd. Like, it's not data that you want to persist. You don't really care about the state of an event. So even losing events, you don't really care as much as losing data that would be stored in etcd. So having a separate data store for this kind of data would be better, in my opinion.
Yeah, that makes sense.
But it's difficult to move events to something different because of how long they've been around.
think the main thing here as well is that just adding an external data store is a huge, well, not external, adding a secondary data store to the Kubernetes project itself is a big thing that's going to involve a lot of SIGs. Like I expect SIG architecture are going to be very interested in that to start with. And the whole model of that data store as well is kind of an unbound question. So my follow on here is it worth it to make this external data store just for events, like in the long run? Is this adding enough value that we want to pursue this?
So to me, the two areas that need to be improved with events are one, the impact on etcd, and second one, the impact on the Kube API server, because we still get requests for these events that can put pressure on the API server, even though like there is PNF and so on. There are two ways to interact with the events, or two ways it puts pressure. The thing is, at the Kube API server level, I don't think we'll ever be able to remove that API, because APIs are stable. Like a lot of people are relying on them, so I doubt we'll be able to move away from it. Releasing the pressure outside of etcd could be very valuable, I think, for a lot of people, but I don't think the amount of effort that this involves is necessarily worth it, or will be. Like, I don't think anyone would want to commit to as much work as that would need just for events.
I mean, it's gargantuan task. It almost feels like, though,
It is.
coming back. Go ahead. Sorry. I'm talking a lot.
No,
here.
no, I was agreeing with you. Sorry. Yeah. I was nodding. Sorry.
Okay. Coming back to what we said before about whether events are for humans or for machines, it almost feels like we should, though, commit to one or the other, because if we say today events are for humans, they're not for consumption by machines, then we can put a moratorium on no more events in the API server. If you need to tell machines about something, you need to use something else. You need to put it in some sort of status in an object in etcd or something like that, but no more event emission of anything new. That could be valuable in that it will stop the bleeding in terms of scalability problems. But it depends if we actually see this as something that we do not want machines consuming anymore. Because obviously
Machines should not be doing it because the protocol is just broken. Yeah.
And yet it's all over. I think we all know this. Yeah, a load of people consume them. Okay, is that the consensus then? Does anyone disagree with this idea that events are only for humans?
No, events are definitely for humans, and they're. I mean, it says in our official documentation that this is explicitly a best effort thing, and there's a technical reason for that.
Yeah. You know that on the I was mentioning this before at the contributor summit, but you know there's a blog post on the Kubernetes website where it says that events are reliable.
Yeah, I still need to follow up on that. They added a blog post that essentially advise people to write alerts based on events, which is
not great.
And it's a CNCF blog post, so I need to follow up on that. I haven't had the chance yet, but that needs to be removed and updated.
Yeah,
I don't know, but they need to find a solution to that.
Yeah.
That sounds terrible.
Yeah, and if anyone wants to do it at some point, I would advise, it means usually that there is a gap in monitoring somewhere. So either you need to add some metrics or some traces in your code rather than relying on events.
Yeah. On a related track here, me and Jordan were halfway through drafting a blog post that is titled "Events are not a reliable delivery system," to try and be full on just PSA. Do not do this, please. But yeah, okay. So if we are saying that events are just for humans, do we want to put a moratorium on new events? Do we want to make it so that people can't add new ones? And if people come and say, we want to add an event for doing this in Kubernetes, we say, no.
No, I think events are still quite valuable for figuring out what happened in Kubernetes, right? People look at it and they use it as debug information. It's like almost like improved, like, I don't know if it's improved, but it's like a curated set of logs, right? So I don't think we should prohibit people from logging.
That's fair. Yeah, that makes sense. So when you say this, so then the audience of this is like, because some people would say the audience of this is the users who are like deploying things on Kubernetes, but then I guess in this case, the audience is the operator of the cluster. And is that
Yes.
how you see it too?
Yes.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah. So I think that to me, the thing that comes out of this is, well, first off, all the stuff, but the follow on here is that I need to go back to SIG Node and I need to tell them to stop using events for stuff that they expect machines to consume.
Yes. And you can point to the etcd issue that I linked in the chat.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Well, I will, coming out of this, I will do that, and then on externalization and aggregation, I don't think that I actually have enough people to build an external data store, because that is a hell of a project. But if anyone else would like to, then please do. I would have no issue. But I've got maybe 5 people who can do K8s full time, and I just don't think I've got enough people to do that. That's a gargantuan project, frankly. Is a secondary data store, but I don't think anyone does.
Here, I'll relink the thing.
Thank you. Also, I see there's actually stuff in the chat here, which yes, could we have an option to emit events as structured logs? I mean, a lot of people, when they emit events, they actually do they do log too.
Events
Especially,
are almost a subset. Yeah.
Yeah, they are logs. They are just straight up logs.
Yeah,
and
they're
even more like with the new API, there are more like traces nowadays, because you have a start of an event and then an end to an event. So you can actually build spans out of events. And
Yeah,
there
there's
is
that
a
K-span
tool
project.
to view events that actually show you events as spans.
Yeah, this one.
Yeah, K-span, exactly.
Yeah.
Which is to me like the best way to view events. Like it's so clean and it shows exactly what's happening.
yeah, we're also gutting and reusing this as part of our work internally. Okay, cool. So what I'll do is I'll take this and I will what is it? And I will go back to Node and basically just tell them you're using events wrong.
Yeah, I'm
And
happy to talk to anyone who is wondering why that's the case. I'm happy to, yeah.
It
Just
would
point them in the right direction.
yeah, it'd probably be Sergey.
Okay.
But yeah, I will go back to them though in their weekly though first and make this clear and see if there's any pushback.
An easy way to solve that problem could be to disable events API, like serving them, because the main problem that we have is that it's hard to move the data to somewhere else, like for example to logs, to like disk, because then you have to serve them. Maybe we could add an option to disable serving those APIs and then just stream events somewhere else. Like we don't really need a data store. We can just like create a channel through which we would stream events via the Kube API server, and then we can do whatever we want with them, but at least move them somewhere else.
So from an external user's POV here, are you saying like watching is okay and we would stream stuff to you, but if you try and list out the events, you're going to get nothing?
I think that's basically what he's saying. Yeah,
Yeah,
so
and
like
I
sending it
wouldn't
to
watch-
Kafka or something.
Well,
Yeah,
I'm just making
exactly. Like I wouldn't even watch for events. I would just like stream them away.
Yes,
Like
exactly.
add a store, let's say Kafka.
Yeah.
Add a configuration in the API server that would tell it where Kafka is and just push all the events over there.
I mean, this is basically the externalization approach.
Yeah.
Because
But you need to get rid of the API. Like serving the API is what prevents you from being able to move the data somewhere else.
Okay. If you want, then I could put together a cap for turning off the get API of events. I expect there is going to be pushback from people on this, though.
I don't understand why we would even need to do that. I don't understand why we can't just have multiple syncs and have everything work the same way.
What do you mean here?
Like right now we're writing to etcd. Instead, we can define an additional sync like Kafka and send the event as a Kafka payload.
Yep. But then how do you list the events? If
I mean, you have a Kafka consumer, right? Like it's not going to be published through the Kubernetes API. You could still access it because there's an etcd copy. But if you have dual syncs and one optional sync, then everything works the way it did work. And then you also get this externalization, which is kind of just bolted on.
Wait. So if you get events from a specific namespace, how would that work?
No, you
Like
would
as a
define,
user, you query the
as a
Kube
user,
API server and ask
you
for.
would no, you wouldn't ask a Kube API server or anything. If you had this configured, you would just have a Kafka consumer.
Yeah, but then we need to disable
Yeah.
the APIs, because otherwise we will just not be able to serve the data anymore.
No, I'm suggesting dual writing.
So you write to etcd and you write to Kafka.
Yeah, and then things just work. It's best
Would
effort anyway.
Would that
Yeah,
improve?
but then you're still writing to etcd, so the problem is still the same.
You can set your compaction threshold or whatever, your watch expiration threshold to like 5 minutes or something, and alleviate a lot of the pressure.
I thought the events were deleted after that long anyway.
No,
Well,
it's
no,
like I think
an hour.
default
No,
is an
it's-
hour. It's an hour.
Yeah, it's an hour. Sorry, yeah. I
1 or
brain
3 hours, I don't remember. But
it's 1 hour. I remembered immediately now because it annoys me all the time when I see something an hour and 20 minutes later. I don't see the value though in putting these in both etcd and Kafka. Like, because now we still got the scalability.
not breaking the API.
Well, I guess not breaking the API.
Yeah, that is the most important thing.
So that's why, in my opinion, we could have an option that says, well, just disable the API. We are not storing into etcd and we are just streaming the data away.
No, here's the problem. Here's the problem. The problem is, like, it's Lucy, right? Lucy was mentioning that people are using these for machine flows, which means we cannot disable this API without breaking some machine flows. I mean, they're already kind of broken, but we will break them even more.
Enable it by default, but just allow for a mechanism that would let user disable them.
Yes, if you turn it off, then you break all these machine flows that depend on them. You don't know how many of them depend on them. So I'm saying that really the only way that makes sense is dual writing and then optionally consuming it through some other backend.
Oh, you mean machine flows inside of kubelet and stuff like that, or external machine flow?
No, if you want, externalizing should be a dual write so that current things continue to work as best as possible.
Mm-hmm.
And then people can optionally do this other thing if they want this other thing.
So this is basically, and correct me if I'm wrong here, an event comes in on the etcd side, we have the same rate limiting and aggregation that we have already, and then it goes to etcd. And on the external side, we just best effort push it to some external data source.
Yes.
Probably over like HTTP or protobuf, or like just something that people can consume.
Yeah.
And it might then go to Kafka. It might then go to, I don't know, TickV. It might go to SQL. We don't really care.
Right. Exactly.
That does make a lot of sense. Yeah. And that does basically match up with the externalization thing. And it seems a lot easier to implement.
Yes.
Then yeah, well, I say seems because it still seems like it will be there'll be edge cases, but it is easier than proposing an entire secondary data store, frankly.
Yes. Yes, just send a payload to some additional target.
Yeah, we could more easily reduce the TTL for events then, because like it's streamed away and you might store the data longer somewhere else, and in etcd you just keep like couple minutes long events.
This is basically what we've ended up doing internally, in that because there isn't this system, we just pull them straight out of the structured logs of every node and do this firing into a system, into a central system anyway. So, and frankly, my follow-on to that though is I bet we are not the only people who have done this.
I'm sure you're not. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, how about then coming out of this, I'll start putting together an abstract for sending these to an external store. And I'll go to Node and I'll tell them that they're using events bad, which I'm sure will go well.
Please, yes. I mean, it's just you just point them at the GitHub issue. I'm happy to explain it or whatever.
It's always been a thorn in Node's side. There's a Google Doc somewhere with like 3 pages of like things that suck about Node events, but they all still rely on using. But anyway, that's fine. I best not go on a tangent here. But yeah, okay. Outputs of this, I will put together an abstract for pushing these to an external data store in like a dual mode, and then we can turn that into a KEP once the consensus is there. And I will go back to Node and basically say we need to move this stuff out of events into step. What is Zoom doing? We need to move this stuff out of events status.
That's interesting.
I think that's just is this like some machine learning thing in Zoom?
Oh, nice.
Okay.
Yeah.
Hey.
That's funny.
Okay.
Okay. We are out of time, so we should probably call it a wrap. But yes, I guess we have action items.
Yep.
And it looks like David has dropped already.
I am writing these action items onto the weekly sync doc so that they're there.
Cool. Well, I need to run, but awesome. Yeah, it was a great discussion.
Awesome. Thanks for having me. All right. See you.
Bye.